Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Robert Tanenbaum. He is a renowned trial attorney and a former mayor of Beverly Hills. He was an assistant DA in New York County and served as deputy counsel on the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And he resigned in disgust because of what he saw taking place on that committee. Tonight, Robert's going to talk about the mock trial of the 2017 trial against Lee Harvey Oswald and the insider information about the HSCA. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me a warm round of applause for Robert Tanenbaum.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. I normally don't get involved in any of these conferences, but Judith is an exception. Not only is she an exceptional individual, but she's a scientist. And scientists appreciate the methodology of obtaining a degree of certitude. You just don't listen to a witness, and accusation is proof beyond any and all doubt. You have to go through a whole process. She understands that when you try cases, particularly if you're in the prosecution office, you want to make sure that you have certitude. That is proof beyond any and all doubt. You don't want to go through mental gymnastics of having, well, I have a doubt, but is it reasonable kind of thing. And there's a tremendous benefit to being a prosecutor. The cases are skewed in favor of prosecution, but you have to be prepared and you have to understand what the nature of the business is about. And so I want to thank Judith for having this convocation and particularly for inviting me. Appreciate it very much. And I also want to thank Cyril Wecht, Dr. Cyril Wecht, who has been invaluable in this whole process. And probably the best thing I did when I went to Washington, other than leave, was to ask Cyril to be on the medical panel. Because I didn't know him, but I knew that he had opinions, and we definitely did not want to have an echo chamber. We wanted opinions of all the people who were experts, who would not be pressured. The bottom line is that I was asked by Cyril to present the case against the government last year. As a matter of fact, it was November 16 at the South Texas College of Law. And it was a mock trial, and I had the first day. So what bothered me about it is that the government, 54 years later, last year, is still saying the same kinds of things they've been saying for this whole period of time, knowing it's not true. Now, I don't know whether the lawyers who were representing the government knew it was not true, but anybody with a brain in their head who looks at the evidence knows it's not true. So I decided that, we're going to have to do something about this more from my personal point of view. But let's go to the committee for a second. I was asked by Richard Sprague in October of '76 to go to Washington and take over the Kennedy investigation. And in large measure, that's I accepted it from him, but I wanted to meet members of the committee. And the only reason I did this was my boss, the legendary district attorney Frank Hogan in Manhattan, who I'd worked for approximately 10 years and so on, an apolitical office dealing with the merit of cases and so on. I wanted to meet with the members of the committee. And I met with Richardson Pryor from North Carolina, and Stu McKinney from Greenwich, Connecticut, and Lou Stokes from Cleveland. And after listening to them, I said, look, don't hire me. Because they said, why? I said, because look, I'm not wired. If I don't know anything about this. And if Oswald did it, he did it alone, and that's what the evidence is, that's what we're going to say. But if it's otherwise, we'll say that. But if it is otherwise, we want to say that, I want to say that, but you're not going to want to do it because you operate with the forward fumble theory of life. You fumble and you catch the ball beyond the line of scrimmage, you think that's progress. It's compromise. I'm not wired to compromise on search for truth. So I don't think you should hire me. And they promised that they would not interfere. Unfortunately, they couldn't live up to the promise. Sprague was assured that, who is a brilliant lawyer, thoroughly honest, had just handled the Tony Boyle case, United Mine Workers assassination of Jock Yablonsky, and a brilliant trial lawyer. I've tried over a couple hundred cases to verdict, and I think Dick has tried more. But he's definitely a very, very serious person who cannot be compromising anything, much less what the job assignment is. And he served in the DA's office, as you may know, prior to that. And then we became, after Washington, named partners in the law firm in Philly. But he's that kind of a person. So we go to Washington, and my day was really split up amongst three things. The first is, I was with an incredible person most of the time. My first hours of every day was with Bob Grodin, who is an invaluable resource. He's a brilliant person. He's an honest person. And he has a very special knowledge of all of the film, which he was able to gather. And the repetition of my going over this with him every day. He had theories, but he never interposed what he thought, just answered my questions. And at the end of it all, before I left, we had broken down, I asked him if he would break down the Zapruder film into each frame. And while I was there, Dr. Bodden, who I've known for many years, because he was a deputy chief medical examiner in the city of New York, and I was running the homicide bureau, I would meet with him twice a week. There were that many homicides in Manhattan, over 300 per year. And we would talk about cause of death. It was a very exciting relationship we had. And I asked to be the chief of the medical panel. The bottom line to it all is that he got in touch with Cyril Wecht, and we then had this display of all of the frames. And it was very clear that Mike at the time and everybody there at the time understood that one of the shots, it turned out to be the fourth shot, hit the president in the right temple, and then there was a subsequent shot, about 7/10 of a second later, that hit him in the back of the head. And I then, the rest of my day was with dealing with seeing witnesses. You try any kind of a murder case, you want to know exactly what the people who were there observed. Fundamental. And the rest of it was the executive intelligence agency's responses. And the first week I was there, I was asked to go to Senator Schweiker's office, Richard Schweiker from Pennsylvania. For those of you who don't recall, Schweiker was 1976, Ronald Reagan asked for Schweiker to be his running mate as VP when he was running against Ford for the Republican nomination. A very legitimate person who was on the Church Committee investigating the CIA and executive intelligence agencies. And he wrote a report which I commend to you, and it's called, his subcommittee was investigating the intelligence community responses to the assassination of Martin Luther King and President Kennedy. It's about 90 some odd pages. I went to his office with New York City, first grade, best in the business, Detective Cliff Fenton, who was in charge now of the investigation, with me, and sat down on a couch in his office. He handed me a file that was done by Gate and Fonzie. It had to do with Vesciano and Antonio Vesciano and all the involvement that the CIA had with all this. And they mentioned a person by the name of Maurice Bishop. They mentioned David Phillips. There was no linkage there at the time. And Senator Schweiker said to me, look, they're going to stonewall you. You'll give them subpoenas. They won't obey. And unfortunately, the Congress isn't built to fulfill its obligation. I said, what do you think happened? He said, there's no doubt in my mind that I believe the CIA was involved in the assassination. Now I'm coming from the DA's office, I read at law school, and it was somewhat, I've debunked conspiracies that were false, misleading in major murder cases, and I was somewhat stunned when he said that. But in fact, what indeed happened with that was, first Grodin, who I commend because working with me is a 24/7 operation. And the patience he had with me going over all the films and why on the Zapruder film we never saw the back of his head blown out. Well, we figured out, we understood why, because it was tampered with. It was tampered with back when Dick Billings was at Life magazine in 1964 when they originally had the film. And they talked about splicing, but not exactly saying what it is. So we went through all that, and then the CIA issue. During the course of this, we were trying to track down, I was trying to track down with Cliff Fenton, who Maurice Bishop was. And then I asked Cliff to find out where Phillips is. Where is Bishop? Vesciano talked about Bishop. And Vesciano was, he said, received $250,000 in cash, and he was supposed to kill Castro, and all the rest of that sort of thing. And then it dawned on me, in maybe the second month or whenever we were there, because at night there was no sleeping, I had to read all the material to get up to speed on what was going on. That was Sylvia Maher's book, which was excellent. I commend to you if you haven't read it, and others. Certainly Josiah Thompson is in a class by himself, in my judgment. And it turned out that literally at 3 o'clock in the morning, one morning, I realized who Maurice Bishop was. Every time you talk about David Phillips, they say the third-ranking member of the CIA. Third-ranking member of the CIA in charge of Western Hemispheric operations. And it became clear that the third most important piece on the chessboard is the Bishop. And then we matched all of the pieces together. And that's how this thing broke wide open. At the very same time, going over the witnesses in Dealey Plaza, there was complete corroboration for the fourth shot that was fired from the Knoll Hill, as it was referred to then by the citizens here in Dallas, which became known as the Grassy Knoll. And I was very much concerned about finding out from Phillips what he knew. He had testified before the committee in December when Richard Sprague questioned him. And he said two things which are important to note. The first was, had to do with the telex of Oswald on October 1st, about 6-7 weeks before the assassination in Mexico City. You may recall that. And in this telex that was sent out by the CIA worldwide, there was this picture of Lee Henry Oswald, and it was a person who was not Oswald. And there was a description of this person. So the question arose, what happened? And Phillips said, well, the camera equipment broke down. Well, recognizing they didn't have a brownie doing this sort of thing, you know, how many cameras broke down? And then it became apparent that he was asked about the tape of that conversation, and he said the tape was recycled every 6 or 7 days, so it was no longer in existence. And Sprague had mentioned that to Mark Lane. And Mark's recollection was that he had a memo that belied that comment. And Mark was, you know, playing a Stradivarius when he would get involved in FOIA requests. He was capable of getting information out of the government that nobody's ever been matched. And he found the memo. I had office hours for people who were involved in this on Thursdays from noon until it ended. And they would come in and we would chat. I didn't want people to be shut out. And he comes in, hands me an envelope. And I knew about Mark Lane because he was an assemblyman in Manhattan. He lived on 104th Street in Spanish Harlem on 3rd Avenue. He represented people who had no representation. And he was like the scourge of most prosecutors because he was prepared, brilliant, and they were generally lazy and unprepared. And the best thing you can have is a Mark Lane in this business. So it makes the actors who are in law enforcement act professional. But not everybody sees it that way. And so I said, please have a seat. And he said, no, it's not necessary. I know you. You'll do the right thing. The memo was from J. Edgar Hoover, dated November 23rd, 1963, the day after the assassination. And it said in substance, our agents, there were 7 of them, who have been questioning Lee Harvey Oswald for the past 17 hours, have listened to the tape made of the individual who identified himself as Lee Henry Oswald inside the Russian embassy inside Mexico City on October 1st, and they unequivocally state that the voice on the tape is not the voice of Lee Harvey Oswald. I then I didn't circulate this to the committee. There were members of the committee who were out of the Godfather. Before some meetings, some of the members would get up and say, notwithstanding anything that you may have heard, all of the executive intelligence agencies are cooperating with you. Remember that, Bob? And I would then say, I'm not sure what committee they're referring to, but we're not getting any cooperation. And I told them unequivocally, we're not going to Langley, we're not going to sit in a room and not have copies unredacted. We're Article 1 Congress, you're Article 2, we are co-equal branches. I learned that at PS 238 in Brooklyn about the 4th grade, and we're not going to do it. Little did I know the committee had absolutely surrendered for various reasons. And we couldn't get the information that we wanted. I then called Phillips, and it was a very short conversation, maybe 5 minutes. I asked him the same questions that Sprague asked. What happened to the equipment? Broke down, the photography equipment. Where's the tape? By the way, did you send out a correction when you realized that you sent out the wrong guy? No. Think about that. Why would they name an individual, Lee Harvey Oswald, when in fact, the CIA helped him get the job at the depository, got him to pay a room for housing, DeMar and Schultz, and then all of a sudden, it's so important, on October 1st, and no correction is sent. So I said, where's the tape? It's been destroyed. If I asked you where the tape was on November 1st, what would you say? Destroyed. How about November 22nd, November 23rd? Not in existence. Read this memo. He read the memo. He looked at me and I said, look, this is a chance to purge yourself. You committed perjury. You did it with Sprague. Tell us what happened. He folded it up, put it in his vest pocket, and walked out. This was at the same time when the Phillips issue was bursting out at the seams with respect to Bishop Phillips, and now he walks out on the committee. At which point, one of the congressmen got up and said, how come we haven't seen this memo before? I said, look, we're not playing that game. He's just committed perjury and contempt. My advice is, since we're not a grand jury, get a hold of, we'll get a hold of him, make sure he has a lawyer, ask him to come back, give him a chance to purge himself, and if not, we recommend to the House, this is the way it works, the person committed perjury and contempt. Remember, Richard Helms was convicted of pretty much the same thing. And there was not a sound. I packed my things up. Sprague had already left Washington pretty much, given the stringers that they hired to create and disseminate false and defamatory impressions about him in the press. And I told Dick that the end had come. There's no way we can stay on, I can stay on the committee, given the assurances that I was given, and not go and be on a committee where I knew it wasn't truthful. After all, if I was doing this for my resume, think about this. My whole future, and I could go to another committee. And then we could lie to the American people about what's going on there. And then to another committee. And maybe I become head of the FBI. And go to a FISA judge and lie to a FISA judge with a fake file to get a warrant. Well, that wasn't going to be the case. And I told Dick, we're leaving. I'm leaving. I said, I spoke to Lou Stokes, who was a wonderful guy in my judgment, Lou. He was a criminal defense attorney in Cleveland. His brother was the first black mayor of Cleveland. He told me, Bob, I got it made. I got my caddy, I got my women, I got a great job. And my brother screws everything up. He wants me to be a congressman because we're going to gerrymander the district to get federal funds. He stayed in the House for 30 years. You may remember he ended it at the Iran-Contra hearing. He was on that joint committee. But I told him, look, we had a meeting in his office. There were several members there. And there's no way on planet Earth I can stay. And Sprague said, yes, I'm resigning also. And this is how Washington works. They then said to me, would you please take over for Dick? And Dick said he wanted me to take over. I said, how can I take over? Aren't you listening? First of all, let's say I didn't say I was going to resign. Do you think, since I told Dick I'm resigning and now he's resigning, that there's a capillary in my body that I did this for my resume and I'm now going to be the big shot chief counsel instead of just a person in charge of this investigation? I said, but you're not going to do the right thing. You can't. You're not built this way. I'm not wired the way you are. You're better people than I am. I'm just a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. What the hell do I know? What I know is there's a right and there's a wrong. There's good and there's evil. And there's a truth. There is one truth. And that's what matters. And the truth was that we now had legitimate reason to probe into the CIA, get every record they had, having nothing to do with national security, and find out what happened in this assassination. Was this a soft coup that took place? Were there people in the government who planned to kill the president because the president now was revamping the intelligence agencies because of what happened with the Bay of Pigs, how he felt he got misled and he was going to put his brother in charge? Is that what happens in our government? That the CIA and the Executive Intelligence Agency define what our national interest is, and they let us, the American people, vote as long as it all is okay with what they believe is right and wrong. And if that is the case, then I will continue to my last dying day in order to divulge what I believe is important about what our roles are in this government and our society. What happened is that Houston, as I mentioned, did exactly what the government does. And that is, they avoid the scene witnesses. They put on a special witness who, quote, I was told by the highest administrator at the law school, was, quote, going to kick my ass, close quote. Famous trial man in Houston, representing the government, and he had new evidence. And the administrator said to me, what do you think about that? This was the Wednesday before the November 16 meeting. I said, what I think about that is what Margaret Thatcher said about a woman who has to say she's a lady. If you have to say you are, you ain't. But make sure you come tomorrow. We'll see what happens. So the bottom line to all this is that what we need to do is look at the scene witnesses and what the major lies are that the government has perpetrated. And we go through that quickly because I have some limited time here. I could go on forever about this, but I don't want to interfere with the program. Judith will give me the hook. I told her if anything happens. And I'm not fooling around with a scientist. That's all I have to say. So, but let's quickly go through what the scene witnesses are and what the major lies were. As a matter of fact, let's start with the major lie. The major lie, of course, is the one bullet theory. Now, why is there a one bullet theory? The assassins never believed for 1 minute anyone would film this. If we don't have the Zapruder film, and Bob Gronin is an authority on this, believe me, you got to rely upon experts. And he is the expert of experts. Without the Z film, we're not here having this conversation. Because the Z film tells us exactly what the lies are. And here we go. The one bullet theory was because the Mannlicher Carcano, Oswald's alleged rifle that he used, needs, with rifling from the first shot to the second shot, at least 2.3, 2.5 seconds. Connolly and Kennedy was shot between about 1.9 seconds. At the end of 1963, the Secret Service and the FBI said both of them were shot with different bullets. And then the Warren Commission didn't like that. Why? Because they have contrived, this is what the Chief Justice of the United States of America, they contrived a predetermined outcome and gave the pretense of an investigation. It had to be one shooter from the 6th floor depository to Sniper's Nest, one rifle. And so they physically made up this story, which Cyril Wecht does better than any other human being on planet Earth. It's very entertaining. How a bullet 5 3/4 inches below the neckline can then come out the throat, and he, as he calls it, the most accommodating piece of ballistics in American history or world history. And, but there's another explanation for this, which is important and is not talked about. And that is the fake science they used. And that fake science is why the witnesses or who the government puts forward, or the one, for example, who came in from to allegedly kick my ass, which is an impossibility in the courtroom, trust me. The point is that what they do is they argue science. Remember, you've heard this. There are only 2 pieces of ballistics in the case. Those pieces found in the limo, which are capable of being fired from the Manico Carcano, and the magic bullet, 399. And how do they prove it? Through NAA, neutron activation analysis, which is the principal testing component for comparative bullet lead analysis. NAA, neutron activation analysis, the principal testing component. This is all metallurgical, except they never use any metallurgical sciences. And what is the comparative bullet lead analysis for their theory? Very simply and precisely, the fragments in Connolly's wrist, they claim match the magic bullet 399. The fragments in the limo match some of the fragments from JFK in his head. So they're saying fragment to fragment, and the fragments, again in the limo, capable of being fired from the Manico Carcano, and the Connolly wrist fragments match the bullet. That's it. So if you question it, or I question it, there's something radically wrong with us. We're trying to sell books. We're trying to do all kinds of things for our own advantage instead of talking about the truth. Well, guess what happened? The scientists from the National Academy of Sciences, the scientists from the National Forensic Council got involved, metallurgical PhDs, scientists, and peer-reviewed science colleagues, not necessarily known or by the proponent of the articles. They wrote scathing denunciations of that alleged science and called it junk science. You can't do it. The most you can do with the antimony, which is the hardening of a bullet, is say that it was jacketed and fired from a rifle. And in '02, they really hit the mark, and they published all these articles about how fake this is, and that the whole one bullet theory relies on this and it's phony. Well, what happened is some defense attorneys were savvy enough to follow this, and in these trials where the FBI was testifying, they simply, they testified and the juries were acquitting. So now the FBI was flummoxed. What do we do? It's the only lab at the time that was doing this, the comparative bullet lead analysis with the neutron activation analysis, that principal testing component. '04, more articles, more acquittals. '05, in late '04, the FBI went to the National Academy of Sciences and said, give us your best science analysis of the best sciences you get your hands on, and we need help. And they said, it's not a science. You cannot match fragment to fragment, fragment to whole bullet. I shudder to think about how many times the FBI testified in these cases from prosecutors based upon false evidence. Because the worst thing we can do in our society is convict the unjustly accused. An innocent person, better 10 people. And I'm telling you, I ran the criminal courts in the DA's office. We had 250 new cases a day. Better a guilty person, 10 of them, beat the case than ever convict an innocent person. Why? Because in America, we celebrate freedom, not punishment. And we got to sharpen our act so that the worst thing doesn't happen. And this case is very much an unjustly accused case. That's what's involved. Dr. Michael Bodden was unjustly accused by the corrupt DA who took over, Robert Morgenthau, whose father was Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury for 10, 11 years. And he charged Mike Bodden with various acts of wrongdoing for which he was fired, and he was stigmatized as a result of the publication of those charges. I tried that case for Mike in the Southern District of Manhattan Federal Court for over 12 weeks. Disproved every one of the charges. But to tell you, when I say corrupt, and the same kind of corruption exists in this case, it's immutable facts. It's not opinion. It's what John Adams said in 1770 when he represented the British at the so-called Boston Massacre. Facts are stubborn things. They beat down whatever your inclinations are, wishes, or desires. That was John Adams, who said, I will suffer the scorn of representing in this so-called Boston massacre at Haymarket Square in 1770, because in America, everyone deserves the right to be represented. That created, along with Hamilton representing Tories after the war, in a very famous case, Rutgers v. Waddington. And he argued basically what the Chief Justice came down with in Marbury v. Madison in 1803, and that was that the Article 3 judiciary would have the right to examine and determine whether or not statutes passed by the Congress were constitutional or otherwise. But that's the nature of our government. And in this particular case, they wound up executing the president in a case that they cannot make. Isn't it somewhat shocking? It is to me, that we have an assassination of a president and the government can't prove its case. I am telling you, in any courtroom in America, I'll stand by this statement. There is no way Lee Harvey Oswald will be convicted. And here are the reasons why. Let's go to the scene witnesses for a second. The scene witnesses in the case are, let's start with Lee Bowers here. Lee Bowers is in the tower, working for the railroad. He's the chief assistant of Holland, who's on the bridge. And he sees two people pull into that lot, and they're waiting around, and then he sees a flash, and that's the smoke from the supersonic rifle, and which creates a shock wave. If you had a handgun, that wouldn't happen. It's subsonic. And at the very same time, this is what the government knew right away. They knew that Holland, A.M. Holland, known as Skinny Holland, his boss, who had been in railroads for 45 years, the supervisor of this tracking system, because the bridge is not a regular bridge, it's a track bridge where trains are over. This is the overpass. Is that 10 minutes to assassination? What does that mean? I have 10 minutes left? Good luck. Okay, good. So Holland is there with 5 of his colleagues. And here's what he said to the police right away. He said there were 2 flurries of shots. The flurries were maybe 2 or 3 bullets the first round. Then there was a pause. Kennedy was already hit because he stiffened at frame 224 of the Zapruder film. Connolly was also shot. We noticed that because of the indicia of the bullet passing through and his shirt popping open. And we go from there to the pause, and then he hears boom, boom. That first boom, when they're on the bridge watching the car come to them on Elm, he sees the same flash that Bowers saw. There was no time to talk about any of this when they were interviewed. And right at the same time that happens, he and his colleagues also so testify. The second boom happened right away, and they said the first boom was like someone hit JFK in the head with a bat, and his head snapped back. You know the famous snapback scene at frame 313? Do you know that snapback, when his head is hit and he moves with the force? There's nothing in this case, by the way, where anyone ever moves towards a shooter. So all of this jet effect and neuromuscular reaction is nonsense. Sounds great. You know, you could do that with a PowerPoint. Convince everybody it's meaningless. They said his head was hit and it went back, snapped back, and he sunk into his wife's right shoulder. And then within that next boom, it was from the back, and his head went forward. Think about this. When the acoustical testing was done, it turned out that they said there were 3 shots in the first flurry, 2.6 seconds. There was a 4.8 second delay. And then there were 2 shots within 1 second. The first shot came, the 4th shot, from the Knoll Hill area. The 5th shot from the rear. His head went forward on the 5th shot. In frame 328 we see it. But we know because the following occurs. From frame 327 to 328, JFK's head moves 1.68 inches. His wife remains the same because she's turned now like this. His head is in her right shoulder. At frame 328 to 329, it moves 1.91 inches forward. 329 to 330, it moves 2.85 inches. It's moving faster as the time goes by. And at the end, you notice from the photographs, frame by frame, his head now is by her left shoulder. So it goes from right shoulder to left shoulder as she turned. That bullet, the corroboration for that shot, is the following as we see the film. You will note after 313, the shot in the cowlick enlarges the wound, and you almost see it flapping over the right ear. The second thing that happened is, we know at frame 255 that Altkins, who was on the south side of the street, the AP photographer, we see the limo, and there's no damage to the windshield of the limo. At 328, when the shot hits JFK in the back of the head, that bullet fragmented. One of the fragments, it enlarged his wound, and one of the fragments hits the interior of the windshield to the left of the rearview mirror. We see that flare in the film, and we know that's exactly what happened because at frame 350, we see the damage. And keep in mind, there's no other shots that this could have happened with because we have the film. The other fragment hits Connolly in the right wrist. Throughout this episode, he is holding his Stetson upside down, meaning the opening of it is right in front of him. So if he wanted to put a hat on it, just toss it on. His surgeon, Charles Gregory, who served with the 1st Marines in Korea, he claimed over 500 wound cases. He said this was not a round bullet. A cylindrical bullet that hit him was a fragment. And the reasons are, it severed the radial nerve, it cut the tendon in his right thumb. There is no way he could have ever held on to that hat if that occurred. You hear from the government all the time, and you know what? People get shot and they don't know it. So the question is, you ask any doctor, if you were shot in the shin, would you still be standing up? Take this particular example. If you were shot in the right wrist, Cyril's right there, he's an expert. I question him right now without even talking to him. Something I never do. And he will tell you, you can't hold on to anything with your wrist shattered. And you then see at frame 340, Connolly now has dropped it, has sunken down. That's the 5th shot. Now the 4th shot we know came from the side. Why? I haven't mentioned this, but I will. All of the witnesses who come forward say they saw the president's head snap back. Let me stop for a moment. Nowhere in the Warren Commission's 26 volumes, nor in the executive report of 886 pages that came out in September of '64, is there one mention of the snapback of his head. I wonder why. And they put on witnesses who say there were 3 shots, and the last shot hit the president in the head, and his head went forward. So let's analyze that. CBS did this all the time. They presented James Altkins, who was the AP photographer. And Altkins said, and they put him on for this. Altkins said, there were 3 shots. Last shot hit him in the head, his head went forward. Well, they try to explain this backward snap, you know. The experts come forward and say, that's because, you know, we shot a goat in the head. And, you know, the president's not a goat, with all due respect. And the legs flared like in 100 milliseconds. His arms flailed. There's no flailing here. And Kennedy's head moves with the force. Doesn't move back towards the shooter. And the bottom line to this is that there was a police officer. His name is Joe Marshall Smith. He was directing traffic in front of the depository. Women came up to him and said, hey, there's shots going on in the bushes. That's the grassy knoll area. He runs around, not down Elm, he runs in the back, in the parking lot, and he sees a guy standing there. He draws his pistol, a service revolver, he says, stop. The guy says, whoa, 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 whoa. He whips out Secret Service identification. Every Secret Service agent in Dallas was in the motorcade. The only organization of Article 2 in this case, from my experience, were the Secret Service. Who was that person? Where did he get the identification from? This is the same person that we know Lee Bowers saw. Then we have Doug Jackson, who's in the motorcade, and Doug Jackson is on the Kennedy side. If this is the car here, Jackie is here. We have Bobby Hargis and B.J. Martin on motorcycles, and then you have Jackson. When JFK got hit and stiffened, he turned. No splattering of them. He turns, and he says he sees Kennedy get smacked right above the front right temple, and he sees his head snap back. Clint Hill, who's a Secret Service agent, jumps on the car. He gets splattered with blood, brain, and bone debris. Bobby Hargis, who's on the motorcycle right by the Jackie side, is splattered with blood, bone, brain. And what does he do? He gets off his motorcycle, and what does he do? He runs over to the stockade fence. Well, here were 4 other people who did that. Holland, remember I told you Holland's the director of all this thing at the railroad? At the Union Terminal Railroad? Holland and 3 of his friends, remember 5 of his colleagues independently said exactly what he said. 2 or 3 shots, pause, boom, boom. They go to the corner of the fence area and where the shot was fired from, and they see cigarette butts, fresh, and they see footprints that were fresh and wet. Right in that area. Mary Mormon, in her famous photograph, which I had Bob Groden show me at least 100 times, there is an anomalous shape about 1/10 of a second after the shooting. In exactly the same area, the anomalous shape that is depicted in her Polaroid shot, and she's on the south side of Elm, facing this way, across the street, stockade fence, grassy knoll, Zapruder, and she has in her photo the anomalous shape right where the footprints are and the cigarette butts are, right where they saw the smoke and the flash. And given the press on time, I want to make sure I get this to you, because the major lie, my spouse of 51 plus years just told me I have 10 minutes left. And if I don't hear anything from our scientist friend, I will continue on my merry path here. But I just want to make sure that we cover. Okay. What happened is thereafter a very troublesome thing. When JFK's body was taken into, yes, there is another issue I want to make sure you follow me on. There are 2 people. Emmett Hudson is on the staircase with his back, the staircase leading down from the stockade fence to Elm Street on the north side of the street. And the Newmans, you know the Newmans, Gail and Bill Newman, I had 2 little children. They were 21 and 23, Gail and Bill Newman. They're on the grass, in front of the grassy knoll, by Elm Street. And what do they do when they hear the shots? They hit the deck because they believe they're in the line of fire. Why would they think that? Because they thought the shots came over their head. And they were right. All of this is told to the police, Secret Service, and the FBI right away, individually by all these people. But here we get now into what is one of the major lies, not only by the Warren Commission, by the HSCA. Now, I knew the HSCA when I met Blakey, who has never tried a case, he's never investigated a case, nor should he ever. He walks around with a book that says, it's sort of like what we call trade paperbacks in the trade. It's this little fluffy thing, and it says means, method, opportunity. It's the sort of thing you get in law school in the first year taking criminal law. Actus reus, mens rea. Any lawyer who talks about mens rea and actus reus, you know, is really pretending to be even a bad lawyer. And he showed that book to me. I asked him when I first met him, how many people have you shown this to? He said, not many. I said, good. He said, why? I said, because once they see this book with you, they'll know you know nothing about what's going on. And what does he do? He gets a hold of Dick Billings right away. Same Dick Billings who was at Life magazine in '64. And he right away starts writing a report. Isn't that great for Washington? They're good at writing reports. Of course, the reports are meaningless and misleading, but they're white paper people. They can tell you when you have a subway, there's no crime. That's why there are 9,000 transit cops in New York City. There were 9,000 cops total in LA City. 9,000 transit cops who were not NYPD. But the point is that the major lie comes with respect to the manner in which they treat the Parkland doctors. The Parkland doctors were not some group of rookies. The head of neurosurgery was in charge of the room, Kem Clark, and then who said he saw the gaping hole in the back of the president's head. Bob Groden has documented in his book, and I urge you to buy his book if you haven't already. He documents, I believe, 65 at least people who saw the back of the head blown out of the president. The Parkland doctors and personnel saw the gaping hole in the back of the president's head. And one of the doctors documented in his file, Dr. Jenkins, Marion Jenkins, that the wound in the back was a gaping hole of exit. And Bob Groden was abused. I keep mentioning him because he's invaluable. Believe me when I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, people who are involved in this are not invaluable, like the Blakeys et al. This is like the 2-minute warning I have here. No commercial break. Here we go. He is invaluable for many reasons, and here's one. This is one of the biggest lies they told. When the acoustic report came out, and keep in mind, when the Congress got the information on the dicta belt from Officer McLean, who was one of the motorcycle cops, he had his microphone punched in, he didn't know it, and then they sent it to Washington. Washington called up, the committee called up the American Acoustical Society and said, what's the best lab? Bolt Baranak and Newman in Cambridge. They do boomerang. Boomerang, this is how good they are. Our Humvees that take enemy fire, they now have computers based upon Bolt Baranak and Newman's ability. Time is up. All right, 1 second. I want to show everybody this because this is one of the big lies. Excuse me? Thank you, dear. Thank you. I accept your forgiveness. May you be blessed eternally. There are two incredibly shocking lies that have been told, other than what we've gone over. And I'll break on this. Once Bolt Baranak and Newman gave their report to the Congress, they said what I told you initially. They were the first flurry, 3 shots. Second, pause, 4.8 seconds. First, 2.6 seconds in the flurry, 4.8 seconds in the pause, and then boom, boom. 0.7 of a second from second boom to first boom. Shot, fourth shot, first boom. 0.7 of a second approximately later, the shot to the back of the head. The committee now is going to reconcile and synchronize. What happened? Was that a shot or what? I lost my microphone. This will still work, no? That's one way to get rid of me. A lot of judges have tried this. Thank you very much. And they had several members of the committee. I'm sure Bob Groden has testified to this in some fashion or discussed it with you, but it's important to note. He was told by Blakey, when the committee was there to reconcile and synchronize what they saw in the film, the shots fired, and the acoustic experts. And by the way, the committee didn't like what both Baranak and Newman said, so they said to the American Acoustical Society, what's the second best group? And they said Queens College Computer Sciences. They came out. They were more certain about what I just told you than both Baranak and Newman, which was very certain. And so Bob Groden is there. Instead of respecting him for the kind of work he's done, not for himself, but because he cares about telling the truth. And he's threatened. Don't say anything. If you do, there'll be serious repercussions. Here's what happened. The members of the committee said, yeah, the fourth shot's from the grassy knoll. Hit him in the head. That's why the snapback occurred. He said, no, that can't happen. Why not? Because we have no medical evidence that shot from the front hit him. Here's what they knew. In the archives, you can get this. I know it would be better if I had PowerPoints. I know people love PowerPoints. They're enamored with them. But if you look at this picture, can you see it back there? This exhibit? This exhibit shows you the tiny, minute fragments that are in JFK's skull above the Temple area, in that area. They knew this. What is this? This is proof, immutable facts about the lies they told. They have always said, and they're experts who come forward in courtrooms, in mock trials, whatever. They say 2 pieces of ballistics, neutron activation analysis, anything else, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And there's no x-rays or medical testimony to suggest anything other. Well, here it is. These minute fragments tell us the tract and entry point of the wound. Why? Because when you have a bullet hit a surface that fragments, it's part of us. That is to say, the minute fragments have no power to continue to penetrate. That missile dust settles and then gives us the tract and point of entry. And if you look carefully at this exhibit, which you can access, or you could, visit me in my little small city where I reside, I'll show it to you. Or even tonight at dinner. You can see these metallic fragments, and they get a little bit larger, and they're spatially consistent. This is the proof of the lie. The last lie they told, and it's not the last, but in sequence it basically is, they said the following. And they lied to my good friend who's sitting over here, Dr. Cyril Wecht. And they said the following in the report of the Forensic Medical Panel report. And the Forensic Medical Panel report is at page 37. This was in August of 78. Committee was going down December 31, 78. Because it was a select committee, 2-year life. And they said at page 37, access this. This is it for you. I'm doing this for you. This is it. This is the proof that you need, everyone here. They said at page 37, that this is a statement against interest. They said at page 37 of the Forensic Medical Panel report that a throwaway. All the Parkland doctors must be mistaken because there was no gaping hole. There was no gaping hole in the back of the president's head. How do we know that? Because all 26 witnesses at Bethesda during the autopsy saw no gaping hole. Well, guess what? By the way, they then, for national security reasons, they sealed the documents for 50 years. You imagine how much national security there is in a shot to the head that the president sustains? But here's the kicker. At least 20 of the 26 witnesses at Bethesda gave testimonies in the form of affidavits, declarations, direct testimony under oath to the Warren Commission and to the committee. And when Blakey was asked about this, you get this? Are you with me? All 26 witnesses said they never saw the gaping hole. They testified, 20 of them. You know the 21? The 3 autopsists, 2 FBI agents, 3 Secret Service agents, 5 technicians, 1 Navy corpsman, not a corpsman, a Navy corpsman, a White House photographer, and a mortician. Those are the people who gave testimony about this. And when Blakey was asked, how'd this get in there? He says, I don't know. How did it get in there? Every person you talk to who worked on that committee, and I hired many of them, will tell you the one thing he did was make sure every word he approved. And he has the gall to tell Bob Groden to keep his mouth shut. Where the hell are we living? I want to tell you one thing about the roles people play. This is the end, Judith. The reason why they did this, why they lied about this and the gaping hole in the back of the president's head is obvious now, isn't it? After you heard all the evidence, I'm giving you immutable facts. I'm not telling you my opinion. They knew this, that if the American public understood that the shot that killed the president came from the right front, the Knoll Hill, which we call the grassy knoll stockade fence, Oswald could not have killed the president. They were on a mission to make sure that you believe that lie. And the almighty Washington Post and New York Times never print any of this. And it's all there. These are the immutable facts. And what more can you say? I'll give you an example of a very quick other lie, because I have this exhibit. I don't walk around with them, but I have this for you. They decided that they were going to do a replay in 1964 at the Edgemont facility, and that they were going to make up skeletons, 10, of a human head, like JFK, gelatin substance, et cetera, et cetera. And when they fired Malico Carcano from the distance of the height and distance of the 6th floor depository window, this is what the skulls look like. And all these skulls move forward, by the way. They didn't move backwards. And look at that. You know what they call this? These are exhibits 861, 862. You see the side of his face is missing? That clear to everybody? Don't believe your lying eyes, by the way. Is this clear to everybody? This is what JFK looked like on the table. And you know what they said about these photographs? They resemble exactly the way JFK looked after he was shot. You see his face? That's what we're dealing with. I want to tell you lastly, it's the role people play. And the role that people play is significant. When President Roosevelt tried to pack the court in 1938, and he failed, he appointed this little Jewish fellow, 5'3", his name is Felix Frankfurter, to the court in 1939. Felix Frankfurter came to America as a young child, and he was #1 in his class at City College. People in New York then called City College the proletarian Harvard. He then went to Harvard, and he was #1 in his class at Harvard, and he taught for 25 years at Harvard. During that time, he was with Roosevelt in the White House dealing with all the alphabet agencies. But when he went to the Supreme Court, he now knew he was an Article 3 person. You don't make legislation as a judge. You decide whether or not it's constitutional. And he became the conscience of the court because he then ruled on many cases that the alphabet agencies were illegal. They didn't pass constitutional muster, and all of a sudden he became an arch conservative, this guy. What a transition, because he understood what his role was. The conscience of the Supreme Court, and he teamed up with Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson, Justice Jackson, was the head prosecutor at Nuremberg. He was also United States Attorney General, and they were deemed to be arch conservatives. Black, Douglas, and Warren opposed them. You know, that's what this is about. I thank you all, and I want to also thank Judith again. She'll never invite me back, but at least you'll know. Thank you. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Tanenbaum.